button again.
Well, Melissa, it would help me if you don't say anything interesting after about 45 minutes.
Okay.
By the way, Jordan, I did find my chaos ball. So
okay, so Tim, we had chaos earlier this morning at the 8A session where Skip went for his chaos ball after he was talking about chaos, and the chaos ball had disappeared. So the chaos ball went into chaos.
Right, but it is here now. So
you didn't just go out and buy a new one, did you?
No, I didn't.
It is Sunday morning here, so.
Yeah, man, it's early Sunday afternoon here, and boy, I've been in it because Debbie insisted that I put tags on all the Christmas presents before this session started, or my name was mud. So anyway, so here we are, and it's Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon, my time, and today. Let me start that over. I'll do it a nice way. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today I have the privilege of introducing Melissa.a.townsend, who has appeared a couple times before, but she has prepared a new offering that relates to her translation of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which she translated from the Sanskrit. And Melissa is a brilliant artist and translator. And I have come to really appreciate it because, for one thing, I had an aha moment when I looked at the first image that she had in her volume 1 of her translation, where it's simply a painting of a glass of spilled milk, but it represents chaos, and we're all in chaos. And the question is, why would we need the Yoga Sutras, or why would we need any spiritual practice? And obviously the idea is that we need to step back and take a breath, because our life is going so fast these days that we need to recognize that life is like my little red ball here, which is pure chaos. And we were just joking about the fact that I had chaos here this morning, but we all have chaos. And it's sort of summed up in the movie Shakespeare in Love, where Shakespeare is fussing about the fact that his play isn't ready and he didn't think it was going to be good. And Geoffrey Rush says, well, don't worry, it'll be fine. And Shakespeare says, how will it? And Rush says, I don't know, it's a mystery. So here we are in this mysterious moment of presenting Melissa to all of you and introducing her meditation cards. And so without further ado, I'm going to switch to speaker view and ask Melissa to go ahead. Go ahead, Melissa.
So the question also for me right now is, so this is the meditation deck right here. Here's what it looks like. And it's a meditation deck of book 1 of the Yoga Sutras. And one question would be, why do a meditation deck? Because I had already done the book for book 1, there's the book, and also book 2. And I'm also currently working on the paintings and the text of book 3 of the Yoga Sutras. So why did I go back and revisit book 1 at all? And why then revisit book 1 and do a meditation deck? And here's what so one nice thing about the meditation deck that I was surprised, when I actually received the final finished copy, is that unlike in the book, where you can only see one picture at a time, you open to this page and you read this page and you see that. The meditation deck gives you a little bit more of the experience that I had actually working with the Yoga Sutras by painting them. and having all of them up in the studio with me. And since the process of working on the Yoga Sutras was very much a process of not intellectually interacting with the Yoga Sutras, even though I did also look at the Sanskrit and translate the Sanskrit, but of allowing the Yoga Sutras to speak to me on an intuitive level and processing that by painting. And when I first set out to work with the Yoga Sutras, I didn't know any of the Samkhya, the underlying philosophy behind the Yoga Sutras. And not only did I not know very much Samkhya, I was determined not to know any Samkhya because I didn't want it to be a philosophical exercise. I wanted it to be spiritual practice, and I wanted the Yoga Sutras to speak to me. And they did that. I wasn't really prepared for what that would be like, because it was, it was a powerful experience of then really having the Yoga Sutras, that energy, having something dictate to me what the paintings would look like. And in many respects, learning the Yoga Sutras through the process of painting them and what came up in the paintings. So then you can just you can have some of the interaction with like the Yoga Sutras by just with the deck, by having the sense of having all of them, together there in your hands. And you can also interact with the paintings themselves, which are meant to interact with each other. For example, like these two sutras actually lead into each other this way. And you can see the gold lines that kind of go one into the other. So many of the sutras do, they fall into thematic groups that develop an idea. And the paintings themselves also do reflect that. The paintings interact with each other. So working with something like the deck, just visually, you can have more of an intuitive sense of the interaction between the sutras. And the sutras themselves can speak to you on there's the sort of advantage of just picking a card and looking at it as a meditation object and letting it speak to you of whatever it's supposed to say. And that's also important because, like I said, when I started working with book one, I didn't know any Samkhya, and I didn't want to know any Samkhya, and I wasn't even sure if I liked the Yoga Sutras. But by the end of book one, I was totally in love with the Yoga Sutras and ready to dive into book two. And then partway through book two, I realized that I actually needed to understand some of the Samkhya, that I wasn't going to make it very far without knowing a little bit more of what was being said. So partway through then working on book three, I wanted to revisit book one because I wanted to see how my translations and paintings held up now that I understood more of the Samkhya that is behind the Yoga Sutras. I was surprised at how much I got right, not knowing. So how much I got right makes it sound like it was me, but how much that was right came through the process of working intuitively in this way, in the translation and in the text. Although my translations were messier. I translated more because I didn't have anybody else to do it, not because I thought of myself as a translator. And the translations in the book for book one, there are certain conventions of translating that I wasn't aware of. And there's certain ways where like I'd use a lot of words just because I thought I could. So I tightened up my translations in the meditation deck. And so I'm surprised by how much also my commentary is to the point, but the paintings even more so. The paintings, the thing that came through this process of working intuitively, like there's something about art is nonverbal, and language, whether it's Sanskrit or English, is of course verbal. And there is something that comes through in the work that is like always there. That is kind of wonderful to see. But the desire to revisit book one was also to see how my understanding of book one would be different now that I understood more of the Samkhya. And it was really, really interesting. Some of the sutras that had been more difficult for me to understand were more difficult because they referenced the Samkhya. And it was quite a challenge then also to then make and the reason for the meditation deck, there's more with that, which is when I set out to paint the Yogas, to work with the Yoga Sutras by painting them, I didn't have like an end product in mind. I certainly didn't have the idea of books in mind. I wasn't thinking in terms of showing the work. The only thought, because of my background with the tarot, the only kind of vague thought in my head was, oh, maybe I'll make a meditation deck out of it. More for myself than for anybody else, because I certainly didn't think of producing that. I mean, on some level, who buys meditation decks? But because I love cards and I come from a background of interacting with cards, that also did, as I had this moment of realizing I had to work with the Yoga Sutras, and I deciding that I'd do it by painting them in the late spring of 2011. And I spent most of the summer figuring out how I was going to do a minimum of 51 and potentially almost 200 paintings with the tiny studio that I have, how I was going to do that. The format that I came up with, this kind of double square with the writing underneath, is very much based on the idea of making a meditation deck. It's like the idea of a card was inherent in the design that I ultimately did come up with. And there's some of that sense, like holding the deck of like, oh yeah, this is some of what they're supposed to be, where you can like hold the image, hold the Yoga Sutra, look at it, and interact with the visuals and let it speak to you. And then working on the text on the back, we were joking about this a little bit before. Also, I thought when I decided to do a meditation deck that it would be like a slam dunk. I already had the book, I already had the images. I would just like edit down the text a bit in the basket. It's not like that. Not only again did I revisit it's another one of those, how difficult can it be? Like the words that will be etched on my gravestone. How can it be? Sure, I'll do a quilt in 2 weeks. How difficult can that be?
Yeah.
So
many a woman has learned that one.
Yeah, right. But I mean, really everything. Like, so the answer to the question of how difficult can it be is nearly always it can be difficult. Just be aware. So the necessities for text on the back of a meditation deck are very, very different from the necessities of text in a book. You have a very limited amount of space during which you have to say something that is immediately understandable. The person can't have to go to another book to figure out what you're saying. It has to be clear, it has to be precise, it has to be brief. And also for me, I didn't want to do anything like too airy-fairy. I didn't want to do anything at all airy-fairy or new age. I wanted to be accurate to the Yoga Sutras, which is a complex text, referencing a philosophical system that is also, complex. So how to do that in a way, how to give a person looking at one card and wanting to read something about the card, to give them an understanding of what the meaning is, the translation, and what the deeper meaning is, what it says in a way that they can work with, use on that day, right then, but that also is accurate to the bigger meaning of the sutras. And then this is the other thing. So each sutra works on its own. This is one about Om and Ishvara, but it's also, each sutra is part of, as I said before, part of a group of sutras that build that exposit, that are part of a theme, that build a message, a philosophical message. And the whole Yoga Sutras talks about yoga, and the Yoga Sutras are divided into 4 books that each, and book 1 is about samadhi, about the experience of, transcendent meditative absorption. And book 1 kind of gives the overview of the Yoga Sutras, also the big picture. But within the book, the sutras break down into different groups that build this whole discussion. So the way that I did that, so each sutra, the text might have some reference to how, like this one says at the end, this is the last of 3 sutras about Om, closing the series of sutras about Ishvara. But also on the back, there's a line of color, that a color coding that in the insert that comes with it, there's I came up with a system to show that that shows that the breakdown that each of those, that color coding relates to the breakdown of sutras. Can you see it? It's kind of
yes, sort of, but it's very good. Yeah.
That shows the breakdown of sutras in book 1, and each one so the first 4 sutras are what is yoga and why practice it. Then 5 through 11 tells you about the mind and how it works. And then 12 through 16 are about the 2 tools that you use, the 2 main tools, abhyasa and vairagya, or practice and non-attachment. And then there's a group that talks about, how you work with those. And then it gets into Ish, God, or a higher power, and Om. And then it talks about the obstacles and how you work with the obstacles. So they break down into each of these groups, and the color coding at the bottom of each card. I came up with a color coding to help you identify, should you want to, and more than any of the text might allude to, how it fits into the bigger picture of the group. So,
well, the thing that really struck me about this idea, even before you did the cards, and I immediately had the idea that there should be cards, was that looking at the book, I realized that I was having a direct experience of primeval human development of communication, because I realized that, as Dr. Jung noted, that we think in images, not in words, except to the extent that we've now made words images. But initially we thought only in images, and language was developed much later in the evolution of our species. And what I was having, I probably could never memorize the Yoga Sutras in terms of words, but when I had the 45 images from volume 1 or 51, whatever the number is, I realized that I could memorize the whole series and very easily. And
that's really wonderful. That's really wonderful to hear. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a direct experience that I was having. And I said, wow, there's something really to this, because now I can understand exactly what was being said, and I don't need the Sanskrit to do that. I can do it just with the images. But I'm going to save more of my comments until others have had a chance to comment.
Does somebody have I am not let's see, I'm not as adept at managing chat while also talking. So
Right.
Well, I would just like to say something. I just am getting more and more excited about these cards. Everything you say and do, my chest is just vibrating with joy. what you're doing there. But I was thinking to myself, why I would like it so much is because there are these brief shots at a sutra, and then there's the painting there too to sit with, so that in a short amount of time, a pretty powerful thing can happen.
Right. And also, I didn't when Skip said, and I'm going to give the link to get the cards if you want. And I can't, if you're out of the country, you should email me. Let's see. It doesn't seem to be going. Oh, maybe it just went to Michael. Oh, I can't. Let's see, just a second. There we go. I'll put my email address up there. but the Sanskrit is when thinking about, again, the meditation deck, the Sanskrit is, let me get a good one. The Sanskrit is on each card, of course, and it's in gold leaf actually on the actual paintings. But the lineage of learning Sanskrit that I come from teaches that Sanskrit is a vibrational language meant to move you forward on the path to enlightenment just by being around it, by hearing it or seeing it. And so when I first started incorporating Sanskrit into paintings at all, I did so as part of my study and practice, and also to bring that like transcendent vibration of Sanskrit into the world. So the idea is too that, like, so for example, if you're working with a particular card and have it up during the day, just have it around you, that image itself interacts with you. But the Sanskrit as well, without even knowing what it means, that Sanskrit also interacts with you. And is, again, Sri Brahmananda Saraswati, my teacher's guru, said that if you want to change your life, put the Sanskrit alphabet up somewhere where you'll see it every day. So just having the Sanskrit around you, it will move you forward on the path to enlightenment. I also, there was something else that you should skip that I was going to, oh, well, I forget, it'll come back. I'll put my email address, so anybody who's out of the country should email me because of the whole issues with postage and all that.
Melissa, I'd like to say I especially resonate that you looked in and went, this is an ablution pool. It's not toxic or poisonous. And I know how to swim, so I'm diving in, you know, and diving in the deep end, because you don't want to dive in the shallow end because that's how you break your neck. You know, I mean, so it's like, but I appreciate that you did that and then swam and steeped in it until you get to that point of, okay, now I need to learn something about it. But
right.
That way you had the discernment, the kind of scriptural scholarship, if you would, to go, I see issue with that translation. Something's wrong. I should look at that more. And it, in a sense, informed your intuition, maybe? Is that?
Yeah, you mean returning? Yes, I would say that, yeah, I was definitely determined, you know, as an artist too, that's part of the process, to dive into the pool and let the water show me where to go. And and I would say that my interaction with Sanskrit too, I love Sanskrit because I feel that more than any other language, you can interact with it intellectually in a powerful way, because it's such a complex and deep language, and so precise, and intellectually just fascinating. But you can also interact with it in an intuitive way, through the vibration of the Sanskrit. There's many people who just chant Sanskrit without knowing what it means, and feel something from that. You know, there are people who disagree with that idea, but there's a lot of people who follow that, and I certainly. So I come from a pretty intellectual background, so I have a tendency to be skeptical. But I have had some really weird experiences with Sanskrit. Like sometimes just at that moment where I'm like, you know, do I really even, I'll be ready to teach, and I'm, you know, getting ready to teach and thinking like, so I'm going to have to tell them about the vibration of Sanskrit, and do I even believe that? And so I'll be like just chanting, the weird stuff will happen. Like, so yeah, I believe it. It happens, you know.
Right. Well,
I have a question as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Hi, Melissa. It's so good to see you, Skip, and everybody. Let me just put it on. Okay. Melissa, when you intuitively painted the images, well, let me give a sort of a brief, you know, when talking about a dream, or Jung talked about free association, in that he said the problem with free association is that it actually can oftentimes lead you away from the image rather than lead you towards it. And so I'm wondering, when you were painting and these images came to you and you intuited them, did any of the images that you painted, or were you able to determine whether anything that came to you sort of led you away from the material rather than closer to it? Were there any images that you painted that felt like, well, they really didn't fit in with the text, and then you thought, well, I need to leave that out? Or did they all seem to be pretty?
I would say, so again, my experience of working with each book has been different. With book one, I felt like I was led by the nose, like through the yoga. Like I would try to resist the things that were coming up. I would be like, no, I don't want to do that. That's like too hard for me, or I don't know how to do that. Or like I was also cutting up some old paintings, and so I would kind of get a message like, cut this one up and use this. And I'm like, I'm not ready to cut that painting up, and it's like, no, nothing would work. So the process of book one, and I've mentioned the work of Hilma Afklint before, that something else worked through me. Now, I was also a participant in it, and there was a certain point, and that's what I wasn't prepared for. I believe that there are things that you can say about the relationship between art and spirituality that make art, any art. Like I'm a visual artist, so I'm going to talk about it in terms of being a visual artist. But this could be true for a musician or a dancer or a sculptor, who's another type of visual artist, of course, or a writer, like a person who writes as their art. I believe, and there are, art is uniquely, it is not the only tool for spiritual practice, but art, there are certain reasons why art is an excellent tool for spiritual practice. And because I approached the paintings as spiritual practice, like that's what it became, and something else was teaching me through my work. Now, I also work as a psychic. So honing my ability to pay attention to my intuition is also part of what I do in all of my life. As a psychic, one thing that you always know is that sometimes that you are a vehicle for the information, but sometimes you're not always a perfect translator, and sometimes like weird stuff comes through that's not right. But that was not the case working with the Yoga Sutras in this way. Again, I resisted the images that came up. Every time I resisted it, nothing would work till I came back and did really what I was being told to do. It is not, I don't know exactly, it was not the same as Jung's experience about what he's talking about free association. And I can't speak to that, but it was not that. It was not a free association experience. And later in the as we get towards the end of the sutras, so this process of paying attention and of being open to a teaching that was coming through me and allowing that teaching to guide me was profound. And it was also not necessarily, it was the spiritual process, which it sounds really wonderful. It sounds really great. It sounds really magical, but it totally freaked me out. And it, like my first experience, once I realized that this was happening, was anxiety and depression. This was not what I had signed up for. It was not what I thought I had signed up for. I thought this was my big idea. I was gonna paint the Yoga Sutras, and it was not me that was doing the work. It was something working through me. And I was frequently kind of given messages to do things that pushed the edges of my comfort zone, that were either difficult and I always felt like I was going to get it wrong. I was like, all of my issues came up, and yet it was wonderful. That is the spiritual path. It was not comfortable. It was not easy. It didn't make me feel good on like that ego level of all the things I do in my life to make myself feel good. But on some deeper level, nothing felt better. Nothing. It's like I couldn't get enough. That's the spiritual path. And that's the process that happened. So later, as I thought I was starting to get it, oh yeah, now I got it. I'm going to surrender to the process. I'm going to listen to the voice. Like on this one, this is 44, so we're getting towards the end. Like a message comes up to me. I do something that looks really good, and a message comes up to me, and it's like, or not a message, but this is where you get to like that free association. Like it could lead you away. Something comes up, and it's like, do this now. So I'm like, well, I don't know about that, but okay. Now I'm surrendering to the process, and I do it and it totally messes it up. And I have to like go through all this work to undo it. This Sutra 44 is a really complex one in terms of the Samkhya, which I didn't really, I mean, there's a lot that I learned through the process of working on this sutra and returning to it, seeing, it was interesting to see, this is one of the ones where like that I got like some basic important message right. And it was really interesting then to get the rest of the message of just what this sutra means. But the idea is that it is really never what you think it is. Whatever you think it is, the moment I thought I got it, I didn't get it. It's like the process, you are a participant, and I was a participant. I was doing the paintings, but something else was doing the paintings through me. And those two ideas seem to be contradictory, but they were not. I don't know how to explain it other than that. I was a participant, and I was a total participant. I was doing the paintings, but something else was also teaching me through the process of doing the painting.
Yeah.
So, does that answer your question? Okay.
So maybe Manish could speak to this, which is that my understanding is that in India, but with people who are practicing Samkhya or whatever, that typically they don't just go through the sutras, but they meditate on one sutra at a time. I don't know if you could confirm or deny that, Manish.
Yeah, I don't know. All I can say is like in a contemporary India, you know, the books you're going to find on the sutras are going to be by Westerners. So, you know, so you'd probably yeah, I don't know. It's, I think in India, it's a weird, like, you know, a lot of the stuff is just so embedded in the culture itself that it's hard to separate it out from, yeah, so I can't answer your question. I don't know.
Right.
I haven't, frankly speaking, I've heard more about Sankhya since I came to the country, to the US.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Well, I know my reading partner, when we were doing the Bhagavad Gita, she said, we Indians never read the Bhagavad Gita this way. We only meditate on.
Right, there's a saying in India that no one reads the Bhagavad Gita for the first time because they grow up with it, hearing it.
They grow up with it, and it's
right.
everywhere. It's just
but
embedded.
We Westerners, we read the Bhagavad Gita for the first time.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of there's I think, you know, a traditional way of learning the Yoga Sutras would be with your guru or teacher and getting one and chanting it. And that you would learn it by chanting, not by reading, and you would learn a sutra at a time. But the fact of the matter is that also the sutras relate, they relate in a linear sense where they follow one upon the other and build a line of reasoning. Mm-hmm. But they also relate in a non-linear sense. So that's also something that you can see more clearly in the meditation deck. There's, you know, you can pick up the card and see that it's going to be hard for me to pick out like two quickly. That one relates to the visual relationships between. Well, actually, I can between the earlier ones and the later ones, but that sort of understanding would develop over time. You would learn the Yoga Sutras one way, but you would also be expected to know the Samkhya that informs them, and that would help you understand some of the connections. And let's see, I'm looking for it's one of the ones that I actually held up before, Sutra 17, the one that introduces the here we go, this one. This introduces the different levels of samadhi, of transcendent meditative absorption. This one tells you the four basic levels that you go through. But later, in this one that I was actually holding up before, here, this is, so you can see like this particular spiral occurs in all of the sutras later that kind of further develop that, and then it's very, very faint here because you can't even really see it. And and here you only sort of see the spiral part of it. That's a conscious relationship, because later on in book 1, it's announced on Sutra 17, but later on that goes in, the sutras go into more depth as they develop those levels, as they explain more about those levels of samadhi. So you can actually, with the deck, it's easier to actually like put the cards together and sort of have them vibrate, get a sense of how the images, the way that the images interact with each other, it reflects the way that the ideas interact with each other.
And I can certainly talk to the interaction of the Sanskrit even without understanding it, because Deb and I have been looking at Tibetan Buddhism for 26 years now. Deb more thoroughly than I have, because she did a 3-year retreat in Tibetan Buddhism. But the point is that in Tibetan Buddhism, you learn certain mantras that are Tibetan versions of the Sanskrit. And one of those mantras is the mantra for healing, which is called the 100-syllable mantra. And long ago, 25 years ago, I learned that mantra by heart, and have often used it in times of trouble or chaos. And so it just so happens that on Friday I had an MRI, and if you've ever had an MRI, you know how noisy it is and how stressful it is if you're personally a claustrophobic person, which I am. And so when I went in for the 30 minutes of it sounds like a battle going on around you when you're in an MRI, literally. And I just started to say the 100-syllable mantra. I don't understand a word of it, but I trust that it works and know that it works from long experience. And a mantra is to protect the mind. And I was very well able to protect my mind. And even though I knew the battle was going on, it wasn't affecting me at where I lived. And even though I was inside this round coffin, I wasn't claustrophobic, not a bit, because it just never came into my mind. I was healed and protected by that mantra for that 30-minute period. And basically I had white light around me is all that I was experiencing. I knew that there was a battle out there beyond the white light, but it wasn't going to affect me. And so it's very powerful to have that ability to do that and to learn something about these things so that you can use it when you need it.
Yeah.
So one thing I would comment is, so like, in our tradition, like, we have the guru disciple traditions, and typically when you have a guru, you would be given a mantra by the guru. Now, there's always like, well, why can't I change my mantra? I don't like this mantra anymore. Or should I use other mantras, these fancy mantras? But, the guru would always tell you that, no, it's just that mantra, it doesn't matter. You should just, that becomes your main mantra. So if you do that, it doesn't mean like you have to do different mantras for different things. Like that same mantra will carry you through everything. So because it's given to you by the guru, it has this uber power. It can assume the forms of other mantras effectively.
And many of the mantras are bija mantras. They're like,
Right,
they're
exactly.
very simple sounds. So you said, Skip, you made the comment that we think in images, which is true, but also sound, just pure primal sound is extraordinarily powerful. And Sanskrit, and especially like the mantras, it accesses that energy of this kind of primal sound, that primal sound vibration that is also like, we may think in images, but we communicate in sound. We don't only communicate in sound, we also communicate on many other levels. But
Can I add something too? It's interesting to phrase it that way, that we think in images. Right, think in images. I would say in some way we experience in images, and I include sound as an image. So
surely.
The Sanskrit is the philosophy. Sanskrit is a much more precise language than English in terms of how it discusses the mind and how it discusses perception and how it discusses, like, that's why if whether or not you believe the stuff that sounds kind of like new agey about the vibration of Sanskrit, just think about the fact that, like, language is how we structure our thought, and how we think in any language is determined by that language. You know, there's the example of, in Inuit, there's 100 words for snow. And in English, we have, rain, we have sleet, snow, hail, ice, so we have 4 if you count that. And Sanskrit has more words for enlightenment, the process of enlightenment, the way that we think, the workings of the mind, the interaction between the human and the divine. Sanskrit has more words for that. Sanskrit is uniquely invested in trying to understand the nature of the human experience and how that relates to the transcendent experience. So just knowing that, the language itself, not even knowing that, just the way that the language is structured is designed to move you forward on the path to enlightenment, because it's designed to make you think about who you really are and what you really are. And I think, like, when you think about the experience, there we go. When you think about the spiritual experience, what is the nature of this physical experience? So we're talking about perception also, and there's a manifest world that we perceive, imperfectly or not, and we don't all perceive the manifest world the same way. But I think that the spiritual experience is, beyond the manifest world that we perceive with the 5 senses that we've identified, there is something else that we also perceive, whether you think of it as the emotional, there's an internal experience. And the spiritual experience is about trying to understand that internal experience and trying to understand the questions of meaning that arise from the internal experience. And, the most powerful of which could presumably be thought to be, why do I suffer? Which then could lead to, like, who am I and who is this I that suffers and all of that. And then to relate that internal, then the ultimate aspect of the spiritual experience is to relate that how the internal experience and the external experience come together. So any art makes a physical thing, whether it's a movement or an object, and it comes from an internal experience. So art is in that middle ground of the internal experience and the external experience. That is part of the reason why it is well suited for spiritual practice. And then both art, the making of art, and the spiritual process require attention. They require attention brought to the ordinary, or what we think of as beautiful, or what we think of as terrible, and through attention we experience that. You cannot paint something well without paying attention. Whether you're paying attention to the manifest reality, or whether you're paying attention to an internal voice or an internal emotional experience, say for something like the screen, there we have Munch paying attention to the internal experience of profound existential anxiety and coming up with, that. But or whether you're paying attention to some sort of other voice telling you the transcendent experience, you're paying attention to a tree. You have to pay attention, and by paying attention, no matter what it is you're looking at, it becomes beautiful. This is true as a psychic too. You cannot pay attention to another person in the intense way that you have to pay attention as a psychic or as a therapist without finding them beautiful. You cannot. And in that same way, the spiritual practice, the spiritual path is the path of paying attention to, like, say with the breath. I mean, what could be more ordinary than the breath? By paying attention there's a transcendent experience that comes through. So that's another reason why art is a good vehicle for spiritual practice. Not the only.
You remind me of something Krishnamurti said about meditation, which someone asked him, how to meditate or whatever. And what he said was, I just go out in the world and pay attention to a leaf and pay attention to the what's going on in that world of the leaf, and you might see some sort of mold on it or whatever, but that's an entire world there, and that attention means something. There's a very interesting exchange on the YouTube chat, so I'd like to just share it with you.
Good. Yeah.
Anthony says, self-realization seems to come about not after we realize our true self, but once we've done the work of integrating our shadows, which is to say, we bring light to our unconscious, becoming one. Patricia responds, once I heard that Sanskrit, it's a language of consciousness, and English, it's a language of experience. And Anthony responds, I agree, English is good for describing the material world, but Sanskrit is naturally more in touch with the infinite. And so,
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And Justin says, it's a myth that Inuits have more words for snow than any other, a misinterpretation after a linguist once made a list of Inuit snow expressions, including all conjugations and tenses.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I didn't know that, for example, Sanskrit has more words for describing the workings of human consciousness than English does. For example, one of the difficulties in translating Sanskrit is how you translate the word chitta, which I read, I think it might be, somebody translated it as the internal organ, which I think is kind of a great translation, actually, because chitta it's usually translated as the mind, and that's how I translate it on my cards, because that's the easiest way for us to understand just quickly. But it's much more than the mind. In Sanskrit, the word that usually translated as mind is really just about the perception processing. It's manas, but chitta involves manas and buddhi, which is wisdom, and ahamkara, which is like the sense of self. It's all the I-ness, the feelings, the sense that I am a being. Everything that goes on inside that you can name is chitta, and chitta isn't the self. That's the whole point, that we identify with that I inside that has a name and that does things and that thinks things, feels things. So that's the only difficulty with the shadow side analogy. The shadow side is still part of chitta. It's because the self, the realized self, is something actually that can't be named and doesn't have a form, and that's the perceiver, and it's formless and attributeless, really, other than being it's eternal and blissful, and it's not anything you can name.
Yeah. Interestingly, Murray Stein once commented, I heard him say on a video, that Jung believed there was only one archetype. And that archetype was the self.
That makes sense.
Can I share something?
Yeah, please go ahead, Idris.
Hi, Melissa. It's very nice to see you, and wonderful work again, of much benefit to anybody who is gonna access them. Truly, I can envision spreading them on a table or putting on the wall, and then as one can go through one's day, just connect with them. Thank you for being who you are. Your classes on YouTube are wonderful, and your presence, even if you do nothing, is highly appreciated for being around us. So you're a blessing to all. I just want to say something just to endorse what Melissa has done and what Patanjali yoga entails. Our family spent about 13-14 years in India, and I'm originally from Afghanistan. Now I live in Vancouver. this is not my story. So I'm actually going to tell you about Patanjali. We had a great librarian from South India, a very knowledgeable, dignified lady at our school, Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan in New Delhi. And when I was in 11th grade, I went to her and I said, can you suggest me one book that would be something that would help me? My calculation was the library of the school was filled with lots of good books, and India is a treasure. And that school itself has a publication house with hundreds and thousands of books that they publish every year, Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan. So I thought that the librarian would be the best person who would tell me something about, like what one book I can access that would help me. And she took me to one of the shelves, and a small palm size, pocket size book of Patanjali translated by Swami Vivekananda. She gave that to me.
Wow.
And I was so hooked on the book that I renewed it a few times. Finally, I purchased it from the market, and its PDF copies available for free on the internet by Swami Vivekananda. And it's not, I later found that it's not very good translation, with all respect to Swami Vivekananda, because it has his shade of experiences clearly on the translation, but it was a great opener. Few things I can say about Patanjali, how it can be helpful. First of all, I think it's in chapter 2, it says that the suffering that exists can come to an end, something like that.
That's right.
So human beings do have suffering in life, and it can come to an end. And at another point, after you practice going through these stages of meditation that this book specifically gives you the direction, the definition, you will realize that your attention will go to the core awareness within you. And if you actually start knowing that you're not the attention, but you're the awareness of the attention of the awareness, or awareness of the attention, it's almost like awareness of the awareness. Then is the time that actually you get independent from all pains and pleasures of the world. Now, it really doesn't matter which path of religion or spirituality you're taking. On this journey, first you will come across lots of barriers, what I call it like bed of thorns. You will walk on that. So pain will be the first barrier against you realizing your innermost true core, what is good and true in you, that you can call soul or God. And the second barrier will be all the siddhis, it will be like a garden of pleasure. You will just get a lot of pleasure in being alive in the universe as a popular, successful, happy, healthy person. That chapter 3 will actually help you achieve a lot of goodies in this world, but that's actually a spiritual barrier too. And then finally, it's that the chapter 4 that people would actually realize that neither pain nor pleasure would be the barrier between me realizing myself as the awareness that actually witnesses, and it's alive, and it is blissful because all its wishes can come true. That's why it doesn't have a wish, which is a strange thing to say, but unless a person has experienced desiring something very strongly and attaining it, and afterwards they would think about why the peace has arrived to me. This peace actually existed before the desire actually grew. So that desire could be from running away from pain or going towards pleasure. The genius of Patanjali is in keeping it concise, in speaking to everybody in their language at their level. So really, it didn't matter that I was an 11th grade person, student of really young age, 17-year-old, or
Right.
it could be at any age who would pick up and read these lines and try to actually work on it.
I agree with you.
And it will affect all your relationships with others, because if our relationships are not tinged by fear or hope, then we truly meet the other person on the ground that they're standing. You actually meet them.
Right.
You actually travel to them, or you actually open yourself to them. whichever way you say. But there is no working on what to get out of any experience with the human beings or universe or human life.
I'd just like to ask Idris a question. Idris, when
Please.
you were reading the Patanjali that way,
Yes.
in grade 11, were you seeing images, or were you, and first of all, were you reading English characters as opposed to
I was reading English characters, yes. And
okay. And were you seeing images, or were you putting together words the way in the beginning was the words?
Initially,
and the
it will actually
sense?
make you work on your personality, because there are yamas and niyamas. So you actually become very much attentive of what good things you're doing and what wrong things you're doing. So there's a lot of purification going on, and the body is extremely rebellious against this meditation. So honestly, all you can think about anyone who starts meditation is the body pains that they feel, that all the thoughts that they're coming, what all they could have done at this moment that they're not doing, and what all that can go wrong. So pains and pleasures will actually move and shake a person. I started with focusing on a moon. To answer you, I started focusing on a moon, but I tried to say that moon is my awareness, that is aware of awareness. But that was something that I created. Actually, the book doesn't suggest such a thing.
I see that Nancy said, I'd like to have Melissa take, I did actually with some at the, have Melissa take one card and read the back, then talk about the painting. So let's see, I'll do that. I'll try to pick one that's like not, that's not too, let's see, well, there's this one. So, and I have to say that the working on the text was really an interesting process. I worked with my cousin John Landretti, who's a writer and a beautiful writer. And he, one of these writers who, you know, should I have a comma there or a hyphen there? You know, like every word had to like do its job or not be there. So it was really a wonderful process in terms of working with him, and also thinking about what was most important to say. And some of the cards were, of course, more difficult than others to work on what to say. So I guess I'll do, this is not one of the, this is actually a really important sutra. This is the second sutra. So the first sutra just says, Atta Yoga Nushasanam, now the teachings of yoga. That's the one with the spilled milk. Traditionally, that I can show that one and read that one too. Traditionally, the first sutra is just an introduction. It's just telling you, this is what we're going to do. This is what the sutra format is a very specific format that is a teaching format. And so what the first sutra just tells you what's going to be being taught. So here we go, the spilled milk, Atta Yoga Nushasana. Now the teaching of yoga. So there's the back. And the text that I have here is somewhat similar to the book. This says, now that the milk is spilled, now that the mess is made, now we begin the practice of yoga. The glass of spilled milk in the painting takes some artistic license with the role of the first sutra, which traditionally simply states the intended subject matter. The point is that now, right now, when things are going wrong, when we're anxious or frustrated, heartbroken or worried, now is when the practice of yoga begins. Here you are at the beginning. How will you practice? So that's what this says. And then this is the glass of spilled milk. So then the next sutra, so now it said we're going to practice yoga. I'm going to teach you about yoga. So the next obvious question is, what is yoga? So the next one defines yoga, and it's Atta Yoga Nushasanam. Now, yoga is the restraining of the activity of chitta, of the mind, is the easiest way to think of that. So what I have written on the back, so that's a big one. This is the one that every person who practices yoga beyond a few years hears and knows. So what exactly is yoga? That is the logical question that follows the introductory sutra. Here in the second sutra, yoga is defined as steadying and focusing the activity of chitta, our mental and emotional activity. Our thoughts are continuous, busily running the ongoing show of my life. The thoughts themselves are not the problem. Thinking is what the mind does, and a functioning mind is crucial for our human well-being. The problem is identifying with what our thoughts tell us. Yoga is about changing our relationship to thinking. Through the practice of yoga, we come to know that while the body-mind is real, what we truly are is pure awareness. One way that yoga helps us develop this faculty is through concentration and meditation, picking a point, such as the gold dot in this painting, and keeping the attention on that point. So that also tells you then something about the painting. So this painting in particular, this is when I realized I wasn't the one in charge. I think I might have told this story before, where like I had big plans for this painting. I was gonna build up like this really rich, really painterly. I was gonna show what a good painter I was, and I sanded down this middle part to to develop this like really rich, how many layers are there and how many colors are there kind of center. And then I realized that, I got the message that it didn't need anything more. The sanding down was what was supposed to happen. And all it needed was that gold dot in the center. And it totally freaked me out. I mean, like this one, Yogash Chitta Vritti Nirodha, like this is a big deal sutra. And I was gonna like go to town on it. And, but yeah, it's perfect, just as it is. So
I love that your zeal got you to actively and enthusiastically go in and archaeologically, I'm going to sand back in and I'm going to see all these strata and I have all this visceral memory. And what you ended up, that was fine. You kind of wrapped your vision, went in unaware of everything. And it was exactly what you needed to do. Because then when you finally pause, you look and go, oh, I just discovered me. And I discovered the all. And it's interesting to me because, for example, patience is not passive. Patience is focused power. And it's the harmonic of silence. And from my perspective. And what I find, for example, the MRI example, noisy, like can you please take those kids banging the pots and pans next door away? It's like, no, that's the machine, deal with it. Oh, I mean, but to me, from even voice, whether I'm talking up here or whether I go down here, I can tell where I am with voice. And I find that it harmonizes the body. And I mean, as a tarot reader, astrologer, and architect, I'm not woo-woo, I'm just woo. And, just one of them. But I find, and especially even from my martial arts meditations, just the sound, disciplined, repeated, it didn't confuse or lull. It was basically a call to attention for the whole body, all the parts autonomically doing all the different things they're doing, but then for all of them to look at the core and say, yeah, we're going to keep doing what we're doing, but now we're going to do it all in orbits together as one personal, almost, I always called it inner astronaut, because it's like this inner solar system that you now all of a sudden notice how these things move around, almost like open up the back of a Patek Philippe clock, watch, and you see all these things in absolute harmony, resonating, synchronized. And that's what sound, I find, does. When someone says clarity of voice or power of voice, I always find it's not so much that, well, I know the writer, oh, you need a semicolon. No, you need two spaces between those words, or you need you can play down in the microscope, and that's part of it, but there's more of the, like Sanskrit. Before I'd ever even learned anything about it at all, I remember seeing it on a wall. I walked by, I looked, and I stopped, and I magnetically took a double take. And that was the tarot reader in me. And the architect with space, like, what's that? I mean, it's almost like it went, hey, my name is, you want to meet? I mean, it was that kind of engagement. So I appreciated when you went through the just diving in process, because that harmonic resonance, in a way, whether it's woo or new age, to me, just the sound, I don't even need the science. I just need to know that right across my clavicles, the ablution tingles won't go up or down. They just go across. Like, here's my mantle. And from that point, everything works from right above the higher heart, basically. And I find that Skip said that, it protects you. And I find that's part of it. But I think the protection is also the synchrony. And you're surfing as the chaos, with the chaos, kelping in the ocean. You're just moving, and then it becomes not harmony. It becomes, you are part of that. You become your nature, in a way. All of that kind of, when you went 1, 2, 3 through 3 examples, I was like, this is just so resonant.
Yeah. Well, one thing I can say about it clearly is Idris sent me at one point a version of Patanjali in words, just words, because I'd never really studied it before. I knew that Jung had written about it or spoken about it at one time, but I wasn't paying too much attention to it. And I simply found that I could not get into it. I couldn't read it. I literally couldn't read it in verbal form. It never touched me until I looked at Melissa's 2 books. And then I said, oh my God, this is really something. And it, it really speaks to me about the fact of the level of language. I'd be interested in hearing Michael expound a little bit more, because I thought that it was fundamental in Jungian psychology that Jung said we think in images, but you're more of an expert than I am, Michael. So.
Oh no, I just thought it was interesting to use the word think in connection with images, and I think that also has to do with typology.
Right.
So that some thinking types may say that they think in images, and other people may say, well, that images represent the intuitive aspect of the psyche, or that I have a feeling about something. So it's interesting when you use the word. I was just noting that I tend to use think in images also, that terminology. But in some way, the image, you could say, precedes thinking, where the image basically reflects experience.
Yeah, actually, that's what I was trying to say, but didn't say.
And I also, sorry.
So it's interesting too, in terms of like memory. Most of our memories start from the point where we have language. My mother actually has a memory that is pre-language. It's an experiential memory. So it's easiest to discuss it in terms of visuals, but it's a feeling. Her mother then later dates this memory where she was put on a counter while her mother was doing the laundry. So her memory is just of the feeling of the wind and the light and the sun. So it is primarily experienced as a visual memory, but it's more of a feeling of an experience. We have a harder time. It's easier for our memory to function once we have language, because then we can kind of, check the box that it belongs in. But when my psychic ability was, when I was being kind of led through a series of sort of non-corporeal lessons in terms of being a psychic, I was led through the ways that each of the sensory perceptions can work in terms of transmitting psychic imagery and we're transmitting psychic information. It's not imagery. Again, I'm a visual person. I will tend to go towards that kind of language in terms of describing how I perceive. But any of the sensory experiences are valid perception, and none of them is exactly thinking.
Although it's interesting, now that I reflect, I am aware, I'm quite intuitive, and that tends to be one of my strongest, if not the strongest function. That when intuitions come to me, I then translate them into language.
Sure.
But it isn't that they come to me as language.
Right.
I
So
then, yeah.
The psychic too, that the psychic part is not that I see things. The psychic part is that I can then translate it into a useful way for somebody to work that I can translate it. That's what it means. It's not just seeing things.
Right. So first I have the experience, and it can be a profound experience, and even an experience of knowing, in deep knowing, and then it gets translated into language. What is it that I know? What is the experience that I had? It's interesting. I hadn't really thought of it that way before.
Yeah, I mean, I have a specific memory like that where my mother was driving 3 little kids across the United States when she was 25 years old, and I was the eldest at age 5. I obviously had language by then, but she and I were sitting in the front seat, and I have a very distinct memory of just being with her and looking up at her and realizing that I was in the car with a goddess. and I mean, as you see, it moves me right today, but I probably didn't have language for that until 5 or 10 years ago. I mean, I remembered it, but it was only when I was studying Jung and studying the archetypes that I started to be able to put anything around it other than just this memory of being in this automobile with this numinous person.
I think that the memories that we have many memories that we associate. That I have a similar kind of memory that also I had language at the time, not of my mother, but a simple memory that's almost impossible to describe what it is, of just walking out and looking at a crack on the sidewalk and just watching. And I remember the quality of light, and I remember doing it. And I don't think I was in the best mood, but I think those memories are memories of pure being. And that's why they resonate with us. And that's why we don't really exactly have language. And that's why they're also a little bit sort of like a little bit confusing in the sense of like, why do I remember this? I mean, nothing was necessarily happening, but there's this like profound sense of pure being.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember being one of the early audiobooks when my mom would drive. She loved to read, so she didn't want to stop reading. So she would hand me her book, and we're in the car. So here I am, I'm 4, I'm reading Zen Flesh, Zen Bones out loud to her, because that's what she's reading. And we're on a long trip, and maybe an hour in, and I just go silent. And silent to the point where it scared her silent. Like I just kind of in the car, and she looks over. Are you okay? I went, I'm fine. I do that. And she goes, do what? And it was the next koan, where forget self, wash, become other, hear deeply, forget, become self, resume listening kind of thing, where it was just that whole body listening. And she looked over, she goes, well, in fact, you do. Would you read it out loud though? I mean, because I need it. And I was like, okay, and it went away. But I remember looking out, and the brush and the scrub oak, North Texas, just middle of spring, not hotter than heck yet. And it was the first time I really felt illumination out there rather than just light. And it was powerful in that reasons are unreasonable way. It simply was and is.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I come in?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I would like to talk about these images in our speech. I've been currently working on a project on putting light on the Christmas archetypes. And so I've been getting back into etymology. And I actually come from Iceland, and our language hasn't changed much in thousands of years because of isolation. And we have 22 characters or runes in the original language. And I've also been looking at Hebrew, and they also have 22 characters. And when I usually hear about teachers talking about Hebrew, they talk about when they go into these letters, they see images when they speak them out loud. And I was trying to understand one of the Norse gods who is called Baldur. And I was breaking down that word in my head and speaking it out loud. And I suddenly got images because I was trying to understand where he comes from. And we have this religion in Iceland where we mostly do this unconsciously, not understanding where this religion comes from, where we hold a big bonfire at New Year's Eve and the 13th of Christmas. And when you break down this word Baldur, you can say Bál in Icelandic, which means fire, and also Brenna, which means also fire. And in other Scandinavian languages, there's also how you say fire. And Baldur has been connected to the sun, the god of light. And if we look at Norse mythology or the Norse countries, at the solar or at Christmas Eve, the sun has totally disappeared beyond the sunrise. And in Norse mythology, actually Baldur is killed by a mistletoe.
Right.
He is actually invulnerable to everything but the mistletoe. And the mistletoe, usually how you kill an immortal being is, yes, you attack them at the joints. And you can see this in many different mythologies. And the mistletoe, it kind of grows between the joints of heaven and earth. And it's not dependent on the sun for its life force. It's actually a parasitic plant. And it's green all year, also in winter. And actually the sun also, or Baldur, gets killed in the joints of time. And when I saw these images, I got a huge goosebump and a dopamine rush. And I found this kind of very interesting. Because I wonder if you have gone into etymology and see if there's any connection to Sanskrit, to the origin of language. If I would, yeah.
That's a big question. So first of all, what is etymology? Etymology from a word. Oh, word etymology.
Etymology.
Right.
Yeah.
So yes, I've been I'm inherently very interested in language and in etymology. And initially, when I was in college, when I was at Brown, I was deciding between being an artist, and I also was really into philosophy and liked logic, for example. The way logic is pure mathematics, at a certain point, I wanted to study languages and kind of come up with like pure language. At Brown, if you wanted to, you could make your own major, basically, but but I was going to have to take semiotics, and which would seem to be related to that. But semiotics at that time was what people who wanted to study film did. And I remember going to the first semiotics one, the seminar. They spent the whole hour and a half talking about the etymology of the word television, which is not a difficult etymology. So I bowed out of that area. I would say that in the study of Sanskrit, I feel like I get closer to studying that interest in etymology, because Sanskrit is if not the mother of all languages, the mother of many languages, and many of the European languages. I don't know very much about Icelandic, so I don't know to what extent it's related, but I think it's related to all of the Indo-European, and know that it's like the basis. It's considered there's a root Indo-European language that's supposed to predate Sanskrit, but Sanskrit and I think there's and Dravidian are all then the first Indo-European languages that there's any record of.
There are actually many researchers that are saying that that Hebrew actually comes out of Egypt, and it comes from 22 hieroglyphs.
Right. I'm familiar with that too. I'm not actually sure how Hebrew and Sanskrit are said to be related, because having spent some time with Hebrew, they don't appear to be the same, but both are often called vibrational languages. I think it's really interesting that that Hebrew and Icelandic both have 22 characters, because that's considered very important. Hebrew is then in the Kabbalah is related to the tarot, and those 22 letters are each given like a powerful significance. So I didn't know that about Icelandic. I think that's really interesting. And I mean, language is one of the most powerful tools that we have as human beings. I think any time that you get into really investigating like the root sounds and what you were doing with the sounds that go into making it. I'm familiar with the Norse myth and with the character. I think Baldar is how I'm familiar how I'm aware of mispronouncing the name. But I think that you experience these visual images coming to mind, and the connection between his name and the word for fire, that seems like a really profound experience, and is I don't know how that relates to the question etymology, other than that.
I also heard 22 in Sanskrit, but
no, there's 50 in Sanskrit.
The 22nd language, which they call it on Wikipedia. I don't know.
The 22nd language.
22nd, yeah.
Oh, what do they call the 22nd language?
I have to look it up again.
I just wanted to make one comment along the lines of what Gunnar said. I've tried to explain this, and it's quite difficult to explain, but I will attempt nonetheless. But I have studied the Hebrew alphabet for a number of years, and I use it almost as a hermeneutic when reading certain books. And if I'm reading something that gives me an image that I feel like is synonymous with the symbol associated with the Hebrew alphabet character, I'll write that next to it as a way for me to kind of classify the information, organize it within my own thought, but also to have an image to relate it to.
Wow.
And vice versa.
Yeah, that's interesting. That seems really powerful.
And
it works really well for me. I mean, it's a difficult concept to explain, but just for example, I was just reading something about the Book of Tobit in a book that Skip recommended, the Ion Lectures, and he's talking about Nineveh and fish and all of this different stuff and death and all of these things, and it felt to me like he was just describing a situation very similar to the Hebrew letter Nun, as it relates to the tarot card death. So I just create this little cluster of ideas by marking down a character.
Well, once I heard the Kabbalah explained as like the tree of life, like a filing cabinet.
Right, exactly.
And it seems like you're actually really doing that. You are like putting things in the filing cabinet according to the letter. It seems exactly right, actually. That's exactly how it's supposed to be used.
Yes.
I think what we might also be talking about is the distinction between left brain and right brain, because this is something I experienced by studying Asian languages, especially Chinese and Japanese, that there was, back in the 80s when I was actually living in Tokyo, there was a man who had a stroke and he lost the use of his right brain. He still had his left brain, and in Japanese you read it both images and sounds, and he lost the ability to read the images, which are of Chinese origin, and so when Nick is using a character to remind him of a whole collection of ideas, that's sort of what you're doing. You're exercising the other side of your brain to do it. And when you, Melissa, put these images next to these Yoga Sutras, you know, the reason I can relate to them is because the images are more meaningful to me than the words, which don't, for me, you know, just hearing what the verse is doesn't automatically spark up an image for me necessarily.
Right. Actually, that I thought that was really what you said when you were talking about like the way that the images help you with your first experience with trying to read the Yoga Sutras. I think that's many people's experience. The thing is that the Yoga Sutras themselves, for example, they have a powerful message and an important message. And we were talking about this, an important message for our time, because the real message of the Yoga Sutras is that you are much more than you think you are. You are not all that stuff, all the stuff that Idris was talking about, you know, your problems, your issues, that's all stuff that's happening that you deal with. Those are situations, but that is not who you are. You are the eternal self. And to say those words, you are the eternal self, it means nothing. The point of the Yoga Sutras is to try to give you the experience of feeling that, and how you yourself can build this experience. Again, as Idris said, that you don't have to suffer. There are ways that you can work with your life to experience yourself as bigger than you are, even as you are also being the person who has to deal with all these situations that are what they are.
Yeah, well, as we reach maturity, we're problem-solving creatures. We solve 1 to 500 problems a day, okay, right, that are little and small. And our ability to do that is our ability to step out of the chaos and see the problem for what it is, and then solve the problem.
Right. But I think the difficulty then with the Yoga Sutras is that it's the barrier to entry can be so large, yeah, that the sutras themselves, they're written in Sanskrit. Not very many of us understand Sanskrit. They're written in Sanskrit in a format that is like compact to the point of being inscrutable.
Yes.
And then because that's the nature of the format, it's like a mashup of PowerPoint and mnemonic device and haiku, you know. It's there, it's short so you can understand it, and it's meant to be expounded further by a teacher. You're supposed to get the notes. And then also, but it's, so there's, and then the people who then write it, the books are, as Idris said, they can be layered over the person's own ideas or meanings. And then also there's all this scholarship that goes into it that can be really a real barrier to entry. So, but you see an image, like, again, the image can speak to you. The image can give you some sense, and it can be a way in, into like the meaning of, and that's also what I tried to make the text on the back, to make the text like accessible, a way into understanding some of these extraordinarily difficult concepts.
Mhm.
in a way that you can use, that you can work with, that you can feel. And so I think that's a valuable thing. The idea was to give people that intuitive gateway that it served for you, Skip. Like after
Yeah.
that, if you then want to go on and read more, like you already have the entryway.
Sure. No, I've definitely had, you know, several aspects of my life changed dramatically in the last 6 months just by experiencing you and Les Morgan and some others in terms of Sanskrit and what it means to us and what we should be thinking about it. And it really helps to work out how we can make the world better than it has been up till now.
Jordan, did you want to say something?
Yes. It's interesting about the doorway because Alan Watts said you struggle and struggle to get in. And then once you get in, you turn around, there was no door in the first place because it's gone. It was maybe there by your expectation and perception, but then once you're in, everything's opened up and it's not. And it's interesting to me.
As Rumi said, I've been knocking on the door and I go through it and I find out that I've been knocking from the inside.
From the inside, exactly with Rumi. And I find what's interesting is there's a direct attribution with the strength card in the tarot, where there's that natural inner animal, because she's not wrestling or controlling the lion. There's a caress of a gesture of she's engaged the mouth, the power of the voice. And so there's a changed psychological function from the thought and the feeling within to crossing through the throat and then to verbally express is a different psychological function. So there's that poetic metaphor works, but it becomes ineffable to speak in prose sometimes because you're having to change it so far that you basically threw the ball through Mr. Johnson's window. And it's not something that's good and resonant. And so that power of natural voice from that place within, when you go back, the strength card to me is just about that ability to feel that patience, as it were, the resonance inside. And when you express it, there's not as much lost in translation with the actual wording.
Right.
Yeah. And I take the strength card a little bit further in the sense that we always have the strength to live our lives. Okay. No matter what our age is, if we're a one-day-old baby, we have the strength to live our lives because we very quickly learn that our environment provides for our needs. And so we always have the strength to live our lives. I think the place that psychotherapists get involved, and Michael can shoot me if he wants to, but is that we get ourselves on a tangent where we start to not believe that that's true, and yet it is true. It's true. It's archetypally true. None of us would be here right now having this conversation if we didn't have the strength to live our lives. And none of us would be here having this conversation if we didn't have the strength to live our lives throughout our lives.
But I couldn't agree more. I'll second that. And then also, to me, that builds right back into what I talked about, because I think they're together. Because if you don't have the feeling of seeing your voice clearly expressed in action that actually produces a result that doesn't harm you, basically, then your strength starts to diminish. But then when you resonate clearly, it builds back into enhance your brain, the dopamine rush. Okay, do that again. And then you enhance both of them.
Yeah, let's hear what
Skip,
Michael has to say.
I like what you're saying. And how about if I just turn it a little bit? How about this? The archetypal strength is there to carry us through our lives, whether we actually believe it or not.
Exactly.
Nicely put.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. Whether we even know what belief is or know what strength is. We do.
The card then is also about accessing the awareness of it, perhaps, of feeling it. Like the strength may be there, but the strength card is very much about the awareness of it, the feeling it, the felt knowledge that that we have that strength, that we are that strength.
Yeah. Nick has gotten up from his computer just when he said something profound on the on the chat, which is, I may be wrong because I am no scholar in such matters, but I believe the Jewish belief God is always thought to have 13 attributes. I don't know.
Well, and then Gunnar said Osiris was then dismantled or dismembered at 13 joints in follow-up to that.
I was also talking about the bonfire on the 13th of Christmas.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Look at Da Vinci Last Supper.
Yeah.
You can see that he's the 13th apostle.
Right.
But you know, the 13 is the 4, but it's the 1 and the 3. So you have so there's with 4 is wholeness. There's also often the 1 that stands out. So you have the 4 apostles. 3 of them are in animal form, and 1 of them is in human form. So it's interesting that so the 13 represents a wholeness, but also does the 22, right? We were talking about 22 earlier. 22 adds up to 4.
Right.
So it sort of makes sense.
And well, and also 13 is death, and then that's transformation, and the birth card pairing is death, emperor. 1 and 3 is 4, and an emperor is established place, whole being for the first time in a way. So that those all kind of marshal the forces around the troops together.
And it's kind of interesting.
Go ahead, Michael.
Oh no, I was just going to say it's a different kind of fun with numbers, right? That we grew up with.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, and you went a whole different route, and then with tarot, I'm like, oh, that works. But you can also go this way.
In Chinese numerology, 4 is death, right? You know that?
Right. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because it's the other counterpart of death in the tarot. Death,
right,
emperor,
but
birth.
Death also means rebirth, and so, you know, in the theorem of Maria, prophetessa, you know, the 4 is the death of the first 3, right? Because you have father, that's 1, mother, that's 2, baby is 3. And so that's 3, but then that's another thing, which is family, which is the 4th thing. And that means that the mother, father, and baby are sort of dead. And now you have a family and you have to live in a different way. And
well, and the triumvirate of the 8th house in astrology is sex, death, and transformation, or sex, death, and the phoenix. And even in the French, orgasm is le petit mort, the little death. I mean, and that's a whole different psychological occurrence. And
but I have to tell you, I was psychologically messed up by that for probably 50 years, Melissa, because I grew up in Japan from the time I was 15, and I knew that 4 meant death, and that freaked me out. And
I mean, and they take that really seriously, like the same way that sometimes buildings in the United States don't have a 13th floor, like there's not a 4th floor, and like you don't want to be, you know, using the number 4. So why did it freak you out, Skip?
well, because it meant death. I mean, she means death. And
Right.
I just want to say something, man.
Yeah, go ahead, introduce.
With the psychology of anchoring, it's connecting to alchemy too. And then here with Patanjali Yoga, as a person goes through life and they do not know on which part of topography they're standing, psychic, spiritual, personal, in which part of the landscape they are. So having a living guru or teacher who would be like Carl Jung or like Melissa Townsend, who would guide a person and tell them where they're actually on their journey, or a book like Patanjali that actually tells you the stages of the journey and what the final level would be, it's very much encouraging, because if one is in a dark room, not knowing how far one has traversed, what the pitfalls could be, I think tarot works like that too. An alchemist would look at different images and associate with that, and finally they discovered gold. That was the consciousness within. Would you connect it to the alchemical thought, Melissa, that awareness within us is that gold?
Yeah, oh, definitely, 100%. Yes. I just want to say though that I'm flattered that you would give me you would raise me to the level of guru. I am one. I mean, we're all holding hands here. Like a guru is a real guru is an enlightened being, someone who is not invested in anything other than they really have no investment, no need from anybody else other than the bringing them to enlightenment themselves, because they are already there. They're playing with reality in a way that that I would love to be at this point, but I cannot claim to be that. And I think that, so now I'm also, but I would agree 100% with the alchemical analogy, and the imagery of analogy too. Once we were talking about fire, there's a lot of stuff with fire and like the burning away of the false self and the joining of the dark and the light. And I love alchemical imagery also, just as an artist. It's like amazing. But just to say something else to the earlier point that you started when you were talking about like the teacher and the bringing light, and that we all have something to teach each other too, which I think is where we're all like working together on the path, holding hands and trying to share what we have and interact with each other on that level too. So that, but I'm working with the painting book 3 and the writing of book 3, which is Vibhuti Pada, which is often translated as, on powers. And you talked about that, Idris, that there are some sort of like pretty magical powers brought up. My experience is that that we all need like all the help that we can get on the path, and that at a certain point, they said, you don't need a guru until you do. I mean, that there's a certain point at which having, whether it's a guru it could be from an internal voice, it could be, but a living guru, an enlightened, somebody who has no investment other than your own, then that others know themselves as the self.
The one who removes darkness, you're
right.
doing it. I mean, I really appreciate your modesty, but as long as any darkness is removed, the barriers between us and that awareness, if we can actually, and you're already doing it. So glory to your modesty too. Thank you. You can tell people what guru means. Actually, those 2 letters have each meaning, right? Guru and Ru, so remover of darkness.
Oh, right.
Basically, in Yoga Vashishta, it says that when a person thinks that they're the body, and when they say that they're possessor of certain things, then that is ignorance. Right. So if a person can actually remove these 2 misunderstandings, that we are not just this body, or we are not the owner of experience, or owner of this friend, or owner of this enemy, or owner of happiness, or owner of sadness. So when we do not identify with body and also ownership, right, and whoever can actually lead you to that path, your innermost light is actually your highest guru. And people who have touched, like Melissa, the reason I said guru to you, because you have seen that awareness within yourself. You followed your heart, like how we say in English. If a person can follow their heart, their innermost light in their heart is their own guru. And then they can be easily showing their own example to others. So I was not actually exaggerating. I still believe in that.
Well, they say that if you meet the guru on the road, or if you meet the Buddha on the road, you should kill him.
Right. shoot them.
You shoot them because that's a false delusional sense of you. That's you're seeing the importance outside yourself. And I love the counterpoint of that is know thyself above the
Dr.
oracle.
Jung said in true meeting, both of them will disappear. So
Right.
that's exactly what will happen. And I hope none of us disappear in our truth, but in our falsehood, it's okay to disappear. Any part of us that's actually our misunderstanding. But thank you very much. It's just my ode to you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I've long wondered when we're going to get Idris to hold forth in a book or something that will
Idris,
be
you have a lot
useful.
to offer. Like,
He has a lot of wisdom.
He really does.
I have attended to the needs like one-to-one as a person, and it actually does tailor to the need of that individual. And the authority between student and teacher is always lying with the student. It's the student who gives authority to the teacher.
Right, that's right.
And their questions will actually clarify which key they need. We don't have to give them 99 keys that might be needed. The one that right now is actually bothering their consciousness. But actually a lot of answers actually is within the question itself. The questioner is always closest to the answer than the one who's answering it.
Right.
I've always loved.
I do appreciate this friendship that we are holding together and helping each other. So I will be always happy to answer any questions. I have not practiced something of mass communication or public speaking, so I don't know which part would be universally true that would help all people. People are at different stages.
Well, just for those who don't know, Idris works in a very intense hospital setting and is often interacting with people. And I think his calling may be Michael's calling, which is as a psychologist or a therapist. But Michael, you wanted to say something.
Oh, no, I was just going to comment that I've been so impressed by the depth and breadth of knowledge and wisdom of people who participate in these discussions. And it's such a pleasure to be here, to be a guest and to have been invited. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Skip. So I just wanted to make that comment. It's an oasis in this sort of sheltering place time.
Yes, well,
I second that. It's like I bring my yellow bucket and blue shovel to the sandbox and sit down and let's play.
Which Michael reminds me that we have to get some of your wisdom sometime, especially about the Philemon Foundation, because I tried to get Sona Shamdasani to speak with us, and I do understand that he's doing it for honoraria or something right now, and that he wants to receive payment, which we cannot offer. And
I saw him on Jung platform earlier this week, and there really was, at the end, I was surprised, but he came out of his shell even more to, we'll only publish this work if we make the money by the end of the year. So that to me I was surprised, but that was his call to arms. What
was he talking about for publishing?
I don't even remember which book, but at the end, the moderator asked him, I'll have to go back to my notes and I'll find out, but
it might be it might be the guidelines for memories, dreams, and reflections. I think that's the next thing that he's talking about publishing.
It may be. I'll look at my notes because I don't remember off the top of my head. It just surprised me from him. I mean, wonderfully introverted, but that to me was almost like him selling a car. I felt like, wow, he's closing. And for him, that was pretty impressive for him.
Yeah. Well, so Michael, I know that Sonu is quite introverted. I understand that, and but I think it would be great if he would interact with some laymen like us.
Oh no, he does. Why don't Skip, you and I talk about that? I'm for those who don't know, I'm on the board of Philemon Foundation. It's my
right.
Is it my 7th or 8th year on the board? So so Skip, we can talk about that because I can speak to Sonu about participating in something.
And I would love to speak to you about, all of the work of the Philemon Foundation in this context. And I know that we have, today we didn't get so many people here, but after the first of the year, after the holidays die back, we can probably get a lot of people that are laymen like me who, don't usually get the time of day from Jungian analysts, but we're all very interested in some of these issues, and it would be good to have a conversation that might help. I mean,
Michael is a Jungian analyst, and I've heard him give the time of day
to anyone who'll listen.
Right. Well, that's what I'm hopeful for, actually.
I walk around with a big clock.
Oh wow, that's my nephew goes, I'm gonna do my impression of you, and he's like, hi, I'm Jordan, and my mom goes, so what are you doing? He goes, hold on, wait till someone comes in the room. And he sits there, and he's 5, and he just sits there, and now we're all sitting there. So now he's commanded the room. We're all in silence. He goes, don't talk because this is important. And someone walks in the room, and he goes, oh, look, a person, my favorite. And we all start laughing. He goes, it's almost like you're 4, and he's 5. So he's getting a leg up, because he's 20% older than 4.
Out of the mouths of babes, Jordan.
And it was prescient. I mean, it was like, let me give you the honorary degree right now. Put it on your wall. We're going to open you an office.
Right.
He won't watch the news.
Somebody named Magic Sufi here asks if Melissa has any comments on the alignment of Jupiter and Saturn.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the alignment of Jupiter and Saturn, I'm not sure how to sum that up quickly because there's also other, I would want to pull up my charts too.
Should we be scared on January the 20th?
So I think that there's a lot of reasons to be a little bit nervous around that period of time, and it's not just because of the alignment of Jupiter and Saturn. There's like a whole grouping of planets there. And what's more, all the planets are kind of confined together. So this is what was happening last year. This doesn't happen all that often. But like when all of the planets are there in a little group. So this is also like around the time that we sheltered in place too. That was when all the planets are there together, it's kind of hard for the energy that is active to change. Then the movement of the moon becomes very important, because that's the only planet that's moving out of this like really tight grouping of everything, of all just think of it as like all the energy pattern, like the weather is like all like clumped together. And that's happening in January with that grouping of, Saturn and Jupiter together, I think is actually not bad at all. Saturn and Jupiter together, actually, when you see that in somebody's chart, it's often a good thing. It depends a little bit which is first. It's usually a little bit easier if Saturn comes first and then Jupiter, because then they have the hard work and then they get the result. But it's the whole setup, and I don't have my charts here, is the way that then Mars plays into it too, as it finally starts to move out of Aries, and then the Uranus is in Taurus. I'm trying to think of what the other movement is, but I think that the period I feel a little nervous about, like the astrological aspects around January 20th, actually starting around January 12th, really. From into
they're conjunct at 0 degrees this coming Saturday, 0 degrees Aquarius.
Which one's at 0 degrees Aquarius?
Jupiter and Saturn.
Saturn, right.
Coming Saturday or Sunday, I believe.
Well, and if you look at March to June, Jupiter, Mars, yeah, go ahead.
The square between, the building square between Saturn and Jupiter and Uranus and Taurus, like that's the thing to get worried about, not so much like the Saturn and Jupiter together. It's the square to Uranus and the fact that all the other planets are like grouped in there too, and that Mars is going to be moving out of Aries into Taurus as well. So that is that's an explosive group.
Well,
It is, and also the 2013 Pluto Uranus square.
Yeah.
That now 6 years later, we're getting half a Pluto cycle, the real kind of reverb of the concussion of that blast, and then the eclipse energies right now get pushy. They make that, the astro is a little impatient, and you need to mind that. I find that one of the big dangers is these powerful energies happening, but you get pushed into a false sense of urgency, and it's almost like you need to climb out of the class 5 rapids and go, I think I'll have my own discretion and go on my own speed and discern, which is very Saturnian, because the eclipses can sometimes deceive
one
you.
of the things I'm going to do is make a New Year's resolution never to ask an astrologer anything, because they're always talking in code, and I have no doubt. I mean, and Richard Tarnas spoke of this in Cosmos and the Psyche, actually, that astrologers tend to talk about Saturn entering Aries or whatever, and it just has no meaning to it.
It's like what Nick was saying about like using the letters of the Hebrew alphabet.
Mm-hmm.
Each
Sure.
of these is it's a file cabinet for a lot of different ideas. So that's why it becomes easy to use it. I mean, I think I said this too, like I knew that astrology was bullshit growing up. Sorry, I'm probably not supposed to say it. Anyhow, I knew that astrology was like, I knew it. And I only learned astrology because of my work with the tarot. At a certain point, I was like, okay, I just have to know what they're talking about. And I know this is complete nonsense, but what's the fastest way I can learn it so that I don't have to pay any more attention to it than I have to pay? And so I got a big family. I'll get everybody's birth times. I'll do up their charts, and I'll get some books, and I'll figure it out. How difficult can it be?
Here we go again.
Actually, that's exactly what Richard Tarnas said. He was going to write it off and move on.
And it's not that the stars rule our lives. It's that it's like the weather. They are another metaphor for the energies at work. They're the energies in macrocosm. So understanding something about the energies at work in the macrocosm will help you understand something at work about the energies at work in the microcosm. And it's a useful tool. It is somewhat unfortunate that it becomes difficult at a certain stage to talk about, other than one-on-one. Like when I meet with a client, unless they know it, I don't get all into like, well, the Saturn's and Mars. A little bit of referencing that is fine, but they more need to know what
it means.
About, right?
Yeah, what you're talking about.
But when you get like astrologers together, they'll be, oh my God.
Oh, we're dangerous.
I think the secret is the old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. And there's just no doubt that we live in interesting times. And
Skip Saturn being the central to the whole this configuration, and also these squares representing some kind of crucifixion. Anybody with any level of discipline, if they're going through, especially if they belong to the masses, they will be fine. So the majority of the people, especially people with certain disciplined habits, they will not be much harmed by these, because Saturn is like the coldest frozen water thrown on these very fiery things like Mars and Uranus and others. So if somebody is actually having good habits and discipline, they might actually come out of it least harmed.
Yeah, Michael, go ahead. Were you going to say something, Michael?
Oh, I was trying not to say something. I was
Oh,
trying
I
not
see.
to interrupt. I put
Okay.
something in chat. I
Well-
actually have to leave.
Yeah, so do we all.
Oh, okay.
And so I want to thank Melissa very much for sticking with us for a couple of hours. And let's show your cards one more time, because the original purpose of this session was to talk about.
I just have to say, I feel so proud of the way that it turned out. It's such a beautiful product, I have to say, and I'll show the cards again too. The Irene Chow is the name of the woman who's also like a yoga person and has gone through yoga teacher trainings, who helped me with the design of the deck, so the design of the box and the way the back of the cards look, and we worked together to come up with the color coding that I mentioned. So there you can kind of see the color coding at the back that they all have.
They're beautiful, and I'm looking forward to seeing my deck. I presume that I'm going to
You
get it.
should have gotten it, Skip. You should get it soon. I sent it to you already. I'm really surprised you haven't gotten it.
Yeah.
I'd like to pay you a mundane accolade, if I could, on your cards. Just the compositional way you set them up, high center, like equal top matting, deeper on the bottom, like you would set up a painting. Even a square photograph always goes about a 0.5 millimeter or a little more above the center. Otherwise, it looks like it's sagging or sinking. But the way you set those up, they're like watercolors or paintings matted in a frame. So immediately when I saw it, I settled into the image. There wasn't a looking around and wandering. It really just dialed you in calmly, and in one of those kind of ways, calmly, that was strong enough to be gentle, that the artwork was sure of itself and knew right where it needed to be. And that impressed me right off the bat when I saw the first image. So
right.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
These do relate to Melissa's 2 books. This is volume 1, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, volumes 1 and 2. Let's see, book 1, Samdhipada, book 1, and book 2 is Sadhanapada. And both of them are filled with beautiful paintings that each one of them relates to a specific verse of the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. And so I urge you all to take a look at both the books and the meditation deck. I'm looking forward to having mine, which I immediately wanted as soon as I saw the book and started realizing what it was doing to me.
No porch pirates. I keep a watch out.
Right. And
Yeah.
so thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you
Melissa.
very much.
Thank you, Melissa.
And I'll certainly make the video available to you as soon as possible.
And thanks everybody here.
Yeah, and thank you for the new folks that have joined us on the panel. And we have a few people that we haven't seen before. And Gunnar, thank you for your good observations, because we need international stimulation to think more broadly. So I appreciate you being here as well. And Angelique.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah. And so thank you all for being here. And if I don't mention your name, you know who you are.
Excellent. That's a perfect way to, I'm going to steal that.
And there's Brendan. Hey, Brendan, it's good to see you, sir.
Too. Thank you, Skip.
Yeah, you've grown a beard.
Hi, everybody.
Nice to see you. You
See you, man.
look very distinguished with your beard.
Thank you.
So peace. Take care.
Peace.
Have a Merry Christmas, everyone.
Thank you, Melissa.
Merry
Take care,
Christmas.